I'm Nick and welcome to my shop. Today I'm talking about epoxy resin. I've covered this a little bit before but never had a video on its own, so that's what this one is. With epoxy resin, there's a whole wide space. If you end up with a bowl that has a hole in it, you can use the resin to do like an inlay into it. If you have just pieces of wood sitting around, you can make like a hybrid wood resin blank. You can even do cool things like make a mold and cast pieces like dice out of resin. And then with coloring, the sky's the limit. There are a bunch of alcohol dyes you can use that just give color to it. There's a bunch of mica powder you can use that just add pigment to it and add color that way. It's a really cool space. You can mix everything and the sky's the limit. What I'm mainly focused on is the hybrid wood blanks. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do adding color into wood that way. I made several blanks. This one I already turned into a small bud vase, and it's just a cool hybrid blank with wood and epoxy in it. This is the other one that I'm going to turn here in a minute. It's just a cup where I jammed a whole bunch of wood in from my cutoff cards, and this one should come out really cool. Hold up, I'm getting ahead of myself. You're probably asking, how was this blank made? Well, let me tell you. What I'm using today is Art and Glow casting resin, and basically this is just what I have sitting around. In a previous video I used the Maz Deep Pour, and the casting resin and the deep pour resins are kind of the same thing. They are very thick. This Art and Glow is like a honey consistency, where that Maz Deep Pour was like more of a syrup, a little bit thinner. And there's a longer cure time, so this takes 1 day to demold and then 3 days before it can actually start doing anything with. There is other type of epoxy resins out there that cure a whole lot faster, and they cure, they're watery consistency, and they cure in about 4 hours or so, and you can start working with it after about a day. But the main thing has to do with the heat that it puts off. So as epoxy cures, it creates heat. So this casting resin and the pouring resins cure slower, so you can do deeper pours, about 1/2 inch thick at a time, where the more watery resins that cure faster produce a lot more heat, and they can only go about 1/4 inch, 8 inch thick at a time. And the other nice thing is the longer cure time, the more time it allows for bubbles to come to the surface and pop on their own. So you don't really need a pressure pot with the casting and curing resin. If you're doing any kind of molding, you do need a pressure pot. But the bubbles will just naturally come out on their own, versus the quicker curing time stuff, you can't do that. Safety is a factor here, and when you're working with epoxy resin, and especially the mica powder, you need respirator and gloves. If you notice on the actual bottles of the resin, it says, will soak into your skin. So you should wear gloves for that. As for mica powder, it is actually crushed up rock and just a really, really fine powder. It will get in the air and you do not want to breathe that in whatsoever. Really, for whatever you're working with, you should read the instructions, because all the epoxies are different and all the mica powders are different. So let's get to the fun part, actually mixing it up. So the Art and Glow is a 1-to-1 by volume. So I'm using these little silicone measuring cups, and I'm mixing it both together in one. You could measure out each part in their own cup, but my cups aren't big enough. I'm going to try to get this to show up in camera, but you can see there's striations in the mix, and the goal is to mix until that's all gone. That takes about 5 minutes. 5 minutes later. And you can see that it is nice and consistent. There are bubbles in there, but I don't need to worry about that because they'll come out on their own, and I'm using a pressure pot. So let's talk coloring. You saw earlier my blank was blue, and the way I'm achieving that is with some alcohol dye, so it has that color, with a little bit of mica powder so that it still lets some of the light through. After you have it all colored, you need to mix it for another minute or two. Also, here's a pro tip for good technique. You wipe down the stirring stick, Make sure you scrape down the edges and you keep stirring. That makes sure it's all 100% consistent. Checking the color, I just pull out my stir stick and watch it drip down and kind of get a good sense for how it looks. And in this case, I decided I need to add a little bit more dye. So now, I just get to pour it into the mold. But also, wood floats in epoxy resin, so you have to hold it down. In this case, I'm just going to use some packing tape to kind of just tape it down into the cup. Then everything goes into the pressure pot to cure. For this pressure pot, I target about 30 to 40 psi. I have it hooked up to my air compressor and I have the regulator on it turned way down so I don't overpressurize. In case you're wondering, this is the Harbor Freight paint pot that you can convert to a pressure pot. And it works pretty good once you put a new seal on it, all new piping, and really fuss over it a lot. For some reason, no matter what, resin gets everywhere. I have a habit of keeping the surfaces very clean, and it still just gets on every surface. So, always got to make sure you wipe down everything with isopropyl alcohol, stir sticks, measuring cups. Even my camera ended up a little sparkly from the mica powder. So I'm going to get this top here sanded flat for the lathe and this cup. Tools won't know the difference, it'll just cut right through it. There's probably a better way to do that, but this was more satisfying. Another top tip is my grain is going all which direction inside this piece, so using a roughing gouge is not a good idea. So instead, to get it round, I'm using my bowl gouge. This stuff just makes the biggest mess. Whenever you turn these resin blanks, you just get these shards of resin that go flying. So that's fun. I don't know how much I didn't record there. I forgot to press the record button, but I got the tenon turned down the back end and ready to throw this into the chuck. So I'm just laying out the bud vase right now. I have a set of calipers here that give you the golden rule, which is 1/3, 2/3, and that's just good for making things pleasing to the eye. And the line is right about here, so I don't need to make a mark. It's already visible. So the one thing I learned is you can't really get a good finish on this resin using just your regular like tools. You have to use something like a negative rake scraper here or a carbide to get the nice clean finish on it. So I'm gonna follow up with. Now I need to get the hole drilled here for the, whatever I'm gonna put in there to go. So that's 1.25 inches is how the diameter of this. So I'm gonna make the hole for the center here, probably 3/4, probably a good amount. Maybe go to, I think I have a 7/8 bit, so I'll try that. I actually do have a 7/8, so I'm gonna use that. And now back to getting the shape just right. At this point, I'm just refining the shape. I didn't really like how fat it was at the bottom. And it's still just, big down here, but I really like that. I think, cut off the base right here. Could be a cool little bud vase. So let's just sand this up.
Finishing these hybrid blanks are about the same as finishing any kind of wood blank. You just sand it all the way up to say 600 and put an oil finish on it and you're good. I'm using a power sander here just to make it a little bit quicker, but you can do it all by hand pretty fast.
And there we go. Just need to get this bottom cleaned up a little bit and put a finish on it. So that vase turned out really well. So well, I actually made a few of them. You can do a lot of stuff just by gluing together the scrap board or taking a blank and cutting it up and gluing it back together. This stuff is pretty fun. So definitely working more with epoxy in the future. There's a lot I can do there. And hopefully you learned how to work with epoxy as well. That's about it for this episode. Thanks for watching.